Hello, everybody, and welcome to another fabulous episode of the Zeus and Hera Show podcast, starring Tony Mierzwicki and myself, Susan Duncan. Tony is so excited to have his next guest on the show. He's actually bonded with this particular guest, and there's a lot of overlap in a lot of their spiritual paths. And hopefully a future friendship will blossom from this as well. So I'm very, very excited to introduce you all to this, and I know that you're going to love this. But first, the star of our show is Tony Mierzwicki. Tony is the author of two fabulous books. If you don't have them, you should get them. One is called Hellenismos. Hopefully I said that correct. I sometimes say it incorrectly because I'm just silly. And the other one is Greco-Egyptian Magic, which hopefully a little teaser will be back in print soon with a fabulous new revamp, but do not want to give any more spoilers away. But now to introduce the star of our show, Tony, are you standing by?
I am indeed, Susan. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And like you said, I'm really excited about our guest today, George Lizos. He's going to be talking about his latest book, Secrets of Greek Mysticism, a modern guide to daily practice with the Greek gods and goddesses. I actually reviewed this book for my Pathos blog, Holistic Spirituality, in March 2024, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about it. But first, we should have a look at George's background. George Lizos is a spiritual teacher, psychic healer, Greek pagan priest, creator of the Intuition Mastery School, as well as a #1 best-selling author and the books are Be the Guru, Lightworker's Gotta Work, Protect Your Light, and he's the host of the Lit Up Lightworker group and also the Can't Host podcasts. He has been named one of the top 50 health and wellness influencers, and his work has been featured in Goop, Pop Sugar, and Mind Body Green. He holds bachelor's and master's degrees in metaphysical sciences, a master of science in psychology, and is trained in various spiritual and healing modalities. George took part in the first official priesthood training in Hellenic polytheism organized by the Supreme Council of Ethnic Hellenes, which is abbreviated to ISI in Athens, following the religion's legal recognition by the Greek government in 2017. Since then, he's been a practicing priest of the religion at the world's first modern temple of Zeus in Cyprus. George has taught about the Greek gods and spirituality in his books, workshops, and online courses, and his research on Aphrodite has been published by Soul and Spirit magazine and the Numinous. George, thank you so much for making yourself available and coming on the show. How are you today?
Hello, Tony, and hello, Susan, and thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great. How are you?
We're both doing really well. I just wanted to tell our viewers, I went onto Amazon and I came across your book, got really excited by it, contacted you, and we've had a bit of toing and froing, and it's been really exciting getting to know you. So I'm so glad you came onto the show today because I've got a number of questions I wanted to ask you. First one being, could you tell us about the priesthood training that you had in ancient Greek religion in Athens in 2017?
Yeah, that was actually the story of how I eventually transitioned to Greek polytheism. At the time, it was 2017, and I was working in London in publishing. I was working a full-time job while running my spiritual business part-time, and that was my third year doing that. And because I was working like a 9-to-5 job and then running my own spiritual business, that meant I had no time for myself. So I reached a point where I burnt myself out, where I woke up one morning intending to go to work, but my body just wouldn't function. So after the burnout, I headed to Glastonbury, UK, which is a magical town, not the festival side of it, but really the town side of it, where they have like crystal shops and fairy shops, etc. And I had a past life regression there. And in that past life regression, I saw myself as a prostitute in a past life who became pregnant with one of my clients. And when the client found out, he stabbed me in the womb, killing the baby. And in that moment, I made a vow to reject my feminine energy and solely depend on my masculine energy. And I had been doing that my entire life. When I was 15, I almost tried to take my own life because I couldn't accept the fact that I was gay. And that's essentially what got me into my spiritual path. And then years later, I was slowly killing myself by overworking myself, by solely depending on my masculine energy. So I come out of the past life regression, tears running down my eyes, and I'm like, I need to connect with the goddess. I need to connect with the divine feminine. So right across the street from where I was, I see the goddess temple of Glastonbury, like a sign from the universe. So I storm in, I see one of the priestesses, and I'm like, I need to connect to the divine feminine. Please help me. So she explained to me all about the Celtic goddesses. And although I was fascinated by them, I'm not a Celt. So I'm like, I wonder whether I can find the equivalent of that within the Greek pantheon, within my own ancestry. So I go back to my Airbnb, I search online, and I realize that the Greek government had just legalized Greek polytheism as an official religion. And the Greek polytheists in Athens were running the first ever legal priesthood training. So on that very night, I booked my tickets to Athens. I emailed the organizer and I traveled to Athens and trained in that. So it was an intensive course where I was trained both in theory as well as in practice. And then I started as a trainee priest, essentially, back in Cyprus, working with the Greek polytheists here, which I'm doing still up to this day. It's been a few years right now, like 7-8 years, at the first modern temple of Zeus that we have here in Cyprus. So it's been a fascinating journey of researching, of connecting with the gods and goddesses, and really experiencing them on a very embodied level.
I'm quite shocked by you telling us that you contemplated suicide, but I'm so glad you didn't. But the thing is, it just goes to show how much the gods had in store for you. They wanted you to be trained up as a priest. So you're bringing the knowledge of the Greek gods to people. You've changed multiple people's lives by enabling them to become better light workers. And something our audience may not be familiar with is it was very, very difficult to get you on the show because you're doing interviews almost every day. So to actually find a day when you're available. So you've gone from being in the depths of depression, contemplating suicide, to you're up in the clouds. You're doing absolutely amazing work. So, for anyone who's going through depression at the moment, hang in there. Things will get better. And we've got proof here in the form of George.
Yeah, and what I realized in that moment is when I surrendered, because in my decision to commit suicide, I had surrendered the resistance about like what I was going through. And as soon as I surrendered, the answer that I was searching for, that was always there, but I just couldn't see because I was resisting it, showed up. And that answer was just stop caring about what people think about you and learn to love and accept yourself exactly as you are. And we don't need to reach that point to have that answer. Yeah. It's just a matter of surrendering and saying, you know what, like, gods, thank you for coming in and showing me a better way. And the better way shows up. When you're ready to create change in your life, the gods show up for you.
I think there's a valuable lesson there for everyone. There's a surrender component for all of us. Surrender to the gods, let information come in so that we can transform ourselves, our lives, and the lives of people around us.
Exactly.
Yeah. So in your book, which I really, really enjoyed, by the way, you wrote that once you started working with the Greek deities, you quickly came to the realization that most of what you had been taught was completely false. You discovered that the ancient Greeks had not been praying to lifeless idols representing mere mythological characters. Was there one light bulb moment for you, or was it a gradual process to come to that realization?
It was almost like a light bulb moment, because I realized that growing up Christian, I was indoctrinated into the Christian idea that there is one true God, and the ancient Greeks, they praised lifeless idols. And then I realized, like, we've been taught that the ancient Greeks were so good at like inventing so many great things: democracy, theater, they advanced science, they got everything right but religion. And then when I started thinking about that, I'm like, okay, that actually doesn't make sense. Like, they got so many things right. They were so intelligent, but religion, they just praised lifeless idols. And when I had that realization, I'm like, oh, okay, so there's something deeper behind that, were just never taught that. We were taught a side of history that the Christians wanted us to learn, but there is a whole side of history that has been like hidden or suppressed or changed. And that is the truth about ancient Greek religion, which is really deep and really complex, not complicated, but complex. And there is so much depth to it. And that's when I got so passionate about reading and learning from it. And thankfully, I had the advantage of, because I'm Greek, I could read books in Greek as well. And even in books that were like in ancient Greek, I could like find translations to modern Greek and therefore get a deeper understanding of that. So that was really helpful, especially when it comes to understanding certain terms, like in the Orphic hymns, for example, that I know you know as well, and you've included in your book, and I really love them. So yeah.
When I went through your book, I noticed that you focus on the 12 Olympian deities. Do you think that they're sufficient for all your needs, or do you sometimes have to work with any of the other numerous deities that the Greeks had? Because they had hundreds and hundreds of gods. I know the Olympians were the main ones, but there are all these others there on the side.
Yes. So the reason I included the 12 ones has to do with the 4 steps of creation that Neoplatonist philosopher Salutius talks about in his book. He talks about the creation gods, the animation gods, the harmonization gods, and the maintenance gods. And it's 4 categories, and there are 3 gods in each category. And these 3 gods are important because they represent the beginning, the middle, and the end of that function. So, and 3 times 4, that means 12 gods. So there are 12 gods that are needed to run the cosmos, but there are multiple, as you said, secondary gods, and from like different generations as well, that have different functions in the universe. The main idea that I wanted to communicate with this book is that the gods and goddesses are not just symbols, energies, or archetypes. They are universal laws and functions. And there are as many gods as there are universal laws and functions. And this could be thousands or even millions. But working with the 12 ones is sufficient to get you started. Of course, the deeper you get, and depending on what it is you're working on, you can work with different types of deities. For example, I work a lot with Asclepius, who's a secondary god, son of Apollo, the god of medicine. And I even, like in my pottery class, I created the Asclepius rod, and I use that in my own spiritual practice. Like I made it myself. Also, I work a lot with the elementals, the nymphs, the naiads. So I work a lot with those elemental Greek deities, as well as the sunlight deities, like Eos, for example. So there are so many that I work with in my spiritual practice that are not just the 12 Olympians, but usually start from there and then you go deeper.
I think the sequel to your book is writing itself. So
Could
once
be,
you
right?
get people started with the first book, working with the Olympians, they can then work with dozens of others.
Yeah, I mean, I've been teaching about the elementals for many years before I even was teaching about the Greek gods and goddesses. And now it all makes sense because I can bring them into this world as well.
Well, the nymphs were actually the first gods to be worshipped, or the first demigods, I should say, to be worshipped. And they're still being worshipped now. I've read accounts of little old ladies in Greek villages who, even though they're nominally Christian, they're still going off making little offerings at lakes and creeks and the like.
They do. They do up in the mountains. I have been there and I've seen them, and I was really surprised and actually gladdened by it as well.
I know it makes me happy too that the old gods are still being remembered.
Yeah, I mean, here in Cyprus, Cyprus has a history of celebrating a female goddess, a goddess of fertility. Even before the classical times, before the name Aphrodite came to be, they were celebrating the great goddess. That's how they called her, the great goddess. And we have artifacts, we have statues of that great goddess.
Yeah.
And that was the name. And the first drummers were like women drummers were Cypriot as well. And they were using the drum to honor like that great goddess. And we even have statues of that. And then Aphrodite came and took over that great goddess. And how this transitioned to Christianity is that Mother Mary is an important figure in Cyprus. So that great goddess is still there. She's just taken the form of Mother Mary because that's how the world changed. So I find it fascinating that the energy of something still is there. It's just changing forms based on what the religion is.
The Greek Orthodox Church has been notoriously intolerant towards any sort of paganism. So basically, any sort of worship has to go underground in order to have a chance to survive.
Yeah, it has. And a lot of the monasteries and the Christian monasteries and churches we have here, they used to be like ancient temples. Like I know a specific one that used to be a temple to Aphrodite. And even if you go to Greece to Mount Athos, for example, that is basically full of monasteries solely by men, like no women are allowed to enter. In the ancient times, those used to be solely for women, and they were dedicated to Artemis.
I think the symbolism there is very obvious. They wanted to remove the women and, in with the patriarchy.
There you go.
Yeah. In your book, you had some really cool pop culture references. You referred to Hercules, the legendary journeys, and Xena Warrior Princess. How important do you think shows like this were as an introduction for many people to the Greek deities?
I had to include those in because I am such a huge Xena Warrior Princess fan. Like I'm like going crazy, and I still watch the series, and I watch all 6 seasons, even though it's highly inaccurate. There is a scene, and people make fun of it online. Like everybody can go and YouTube it. There is a scene where Gabriel like enters like a cave, and they're reciting a hymn trying to wake up certain statues that were like frozen in the cave. And they're reciting that hymn using like Greek words. But the producers who wrote that script just created random words and put them together, and they make 0 sense. She literally says, "Thank you very much. Good morning, good night, good morning, good evening, good morning, good noches." And there's a Spanish word there because why not?
Yeah.
So highly inaccurate, not much truth about the gods and goddesses, but it got me interested in the Greek gods and goddesses. That's the show that got me into it. It wasn't school. I wasn't very interested like in mythology at school. It was Xena and Hercules, the legendary journeys, and like losing myself into that world that first got me interested in that, even though it's like my ancestry. It was that show that was filmed in New Zealand that got me interested in ancient Greece. And that's why I've referenced that in the book. And I think it's really important that shows like that exist, ideally more accurate, to get people excited, but also to encourage a more deep investigation and study into the Greek gods and goddesses, because they did portray temples and people praying to those gods and goddesses. And there was some kind of spirituality, despite like the inaccuracies. So that essentially like got me thinking into like about magic and about rituals and about prayer and about altars. So it planted a seed for sure.
I totally agree with you that pop culture is incredibly important because it has such a huge reach. So you had millions of people around the world watching Hercules and Xena Warrior Princess, and for the younger generation, it was the Percy Jackson movies. So it gets them interested in Greek mythology. So for some, it's just pure entertainment, but there will always be a few there who are going to think, I want to find out more about this. I want to find out the reality behind it. So movies like that have a far greater reach than people like you or I could ever hope to have.
Exactly. And there's more, by the way. Like a recent one I watched was Spartacus, the Legendary Journeys, which has like had nothing to do with like the gods and goddesses, but you saw them in ritual. And that was quite accurate, by the way, as well. So they're incredibly important because they take up so much part of our consciousness. When we watch those shows, I'm an actor as well. So you get into character and you feel emotions that character feels. So when you immerse yourself into the world, you become part of that world and it affects you in some way. And if we can create content that educates people in the right way about the Greek gods and goddesses, I feel like we're onto something. We're creating change, essentially. We're creating global change through media.
Okay, so I've got a question for you. As an actor, you get into character for a particular role. Now, it could be a fictional role, but say, for instance, you're in a movie where you were portraying a god form. Say you portrayed Apollo or portrayed Ganymede. So you would have to bring that energy into you. Does that form a bridge between yourself and the divine, or is it just something fictional? Like, how real is it?
I love that question. Now, there are many acting techniques. I'm trained in like the Meister and the Michael Chekhov one, but when it comes to like connecting with such important characters, like last year in my final exam, I was Prometheus.
Wow.
I did Aeschylus as Prometheus. So I had to get into character for that. So I'm like, okay, like any other actor would study these from the traditional like acting technique perspective. But I'm a priest, like I actually like pray to Prometheus. So how can I approach this to make this more spiritual? So the way that I connect with all my characters now is I create energetic chords with the essence, with the vibrational frequency of that character. Even if it is, let's say, for example, it is a god like Prometheus, there is the vibrational frequency of Prometheus, this universal law that Prometheus represents. And it's out there. It's not, and it's, by out there, I mean, it's here, it's everywhere. Like we can reach it, it's palpable. So I literally visualize an energetic cord extend from my heart chakra and connect with my intention to that energy. And then I allow that energy to flow into my body. And literally I have the presence of Prometheus stepping into my body, breathing me. And then when I start acting, it's something different coming through. And I tried this for the first time like with the first role I did like a few years ago, and it worked so much. So now I do it every single time, but especially with gods and goddesses that are real, then it's way more palpable. When I did Prometheus, and I actually have if you people go to my Instagram at George Lizos, and you go to one of the highlights that I have there, acting, I have that Prometheus monologue, and you'll see a different being like acting through me. It's not me. There's nothing of me in there. And that's powerful.
Wow. My next question was going to be to ask you to walk us through the meditation process that you use for recommending with the Greek deities. And it sounds like you've pretty well answered that. So do you normally go for a heart-to-heart connection with the gods that you're working with, or how do you go about it?
So in the meditations that I included in the book, those are essentially attunements to like attune to the frequency of that god. And there is a visualization aspect in there that has to do with the symbolism of that particular god, talking about their colors, their symbolism, and they're taking you on a journey, gifting you some kind of a spiritual symbol that helps you attune to their vibration. But normally the way that I connect with the gods is through altar work. I have my altar, and altars are such powerful ways of connecting with spirit. They've been used by cultures around the world for thousands of years. They are portals between the profane and the sacred. They create this bridge that allow you to connect to something more. So I have my household practice where I have my altar, having all the gods and goddesses, depending on who it is I'm working on every single month. There are symbols, crystals, like offerings, libations, and like candles. And then I spend time there reciting the Orphic hymn, and it is through that connection that I experience communion with the gods. But then, of course, on a day-to-day basis, I have like a more of a moment-to-moment relationship with them, depending on what it is I'm working on. At any moment, we can tune in and say, you know what, I am Apollo. And that's why in the book, I include affirmations such as I am Apollo, I am Aphrodite, I am Hera, because the gods are not external to us. My teacher always used to tell me, you don't need to search to find the gods outside of yourself. You're already swimming in the ocean of the gods. So it's just a matter of realizing that in this moment, you're flowing in Athena or Poseidon or Hermes or Hephaestus. And it's just a matter of realizing that. So you can go complex and set up altars or do meditations, or you can say, I am Zeus, or I am Ares, and activate that frequency within you instantly.
I really like that. I love the way you're keeping it very simple. And I also love the way you're giving an option that people can either keep it simple or they can go all out and make things incredibly elaborate, do complex rituals, set up altars and the like. I love that there's a simple option that people can use.
Yeah, because when I was finishing this book, and I say this in the epilogue of the book, I had been finishing this book. I was finishing the book while at the same time I was rehearsing from Mamma Mia, a Mamma Mia show that I was doing. And I was learning lights from my drama school exams. And I was trying to have a life. And I was telling people, you need to do 3 rituals every single week, blah, 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 so many practices. And I had done nothing for months. And I'm like, I felt such an imposter because I wasn't like walking my talk. And then I'm like, you know what? Let's take a step back. And I was going through my notes that I got in my priesthood training back in 2017. And I saw that quote from my teacher that you don't need to search outside to find the gods because the gods are already here. And in that moment, I stopped, I turned within, and I told myself, wake up. And in that moment, by telling myself, wake up, my divinity, the gods, woke up within me. So in that moment, I realized there are so many different levels that the spiritual practice can take. And life happens, and we don't always have the time to do an elaborate ritual 3 times a month. So in those moments, the gods haven't left you. They're still there. And it's just a matter of tuning it in, turning it on, and giving yourself permission to experience that.
When you wrote about the Olympians in your book, you had a very interesting order. And if there's one thing I've worked out about you, you don't do things randomly. You put a lot of thought into everything you do. So the order that you chose was Hera, Poseidon, Athena, Aphrodite, Apollo, Hermes, Zeus, Demeter, Hephaestus, Ares, Artemis, Hestia. Was there a reason that you chose that order? What's the rationale behind it?
Yes, there is a reason behind it. So the Supreme Council of Ethnic Hellenes in Greece, they've created a contemporary Greek wheel of the year that's based on the ancient one. As you know, ancient Greece was basically city-states, and each city-state had their own festival calendar. Like here in Cyprus, right now in April, we're celebrating the Adonia festival according to our ancient calendar. While in Greece, in Attica, they're celebrating the Aphrodisia. Very similar vibes, similar energies, but it's a different festival. So what they did, they brought it together into a single calendar, single wheel of the year that we can all follow. And that is the order they arranged the gods in. Now, of course, this is aligned with the festivals of the year. In January, we celebrate the Theogamia festival, the sacred wedding of Hera and Zeus, and therefore Hera is a principal goddess. Then in February, we go into the Anthesteria, where we have Poseidon. Then we go into the Asclepiea, then Charisia, then Thargelia. So according to the festivals, there is a main god or goddess and their male or female counterpart to create balance between the divine feminine and the divine masculine, as well as their virtues, the virtues of that god. So that is the reasoning behind that. And there is alignment with the state of the earth, the changing of the seasons during that time as well. For example, right now in April that we're recording this episode, Aphrodisia, so the goddess of the month is Aphrodite, because Aphrodite, she embodies the law of form. She gives form to things. She brings in this creative energy, which we can see out in nature, because nature is in full bloom right now. We're in the middle of spring, so everything is blooming, everything is forming. So Aphrodite matches that kind of energy, and therefore it makes sense. Then in May, we have Apollo. That's the last month of springtime. There is increased solar light coming in because daylight savings times has happened as well, like nature is blooming. And who is Apollo? He's the god of light. Mm-hmm. So he brings in that energy. So there is an association between the gods in that order and what's happening with the changing of the seasons.
Okay. That part of the book was concluded with a meditation to meet your guardian god or goddess. And you said that that could be one of the 12 Olympians, or it could be a secondary god such as Asclepius, Dionysus, Pan, Eros, Hecate, one of the muses, or any one of the other minor gods. I was wondering if the guardian god or goddess tied in with the holy guardian angel concept in ceremonial magic.
Yes, it is. So I haven't studied ceremonial magic, but I was trained back in the day in angel therapy and angel healing. So I did a lot of work with the angels while I was in my New Age era. And I still teach about the angels because I believe that the energy is there. They are real. I just refer to them in different ways these days. I see them as like beings of light. So drawing from that understanding that we have a guardian angel, for example, we're also taught, by the way, in like Greek polytheism that we have a guardian god or goddess. So the two concepts pretty much aligned. So I didn't have to like take that and transfer it to this, because it is something that I was taught in my training as well, that we're all born with a guardian god or goddess who accompanies us throughout the life, but also maybe throughout our many lifetimes, moving on, if someone believes in reincarnation. So I believe that that god or goddess has a frequency and a purpose that's aligned to our purpose, and therefore can guide us through following and fulfilling their purpose. I feel that my guardian god is Apollo, because a lot of the characteristics that Apollo has also align with mine, and therefore I draw from that frequency to help me move forward. However, I also believe that different gods and goddesses come into our lives as guardians at different moments in our lives, depending on the lessons we're here to learn. So for a long period of time, I had to deal with a lot of healing sexual trauma and accepting my body and getting to love myself and my body. And therefore, I did a lot of work with Aphrodite, who's all about embracing all expressions of love, not distinguishing between spiritual love and sexual love and flirtatious love. She embraces everything. She is sacred sex. So I worked a lot with her. And then as I move on, I work with different gods and goddesses depending on who comes up. And that's true for everyone. And by the way, even for people who never work with the Greek gods or goddesses, or don't want to work with the Greek gods and goddesses, you're still working with them, because universal laws are universal laws. Whether you're calling them Aphrodite or Ishtar, whether you're calling it Ra or Apollo, it's the god of light, and she's the goddess of sacred sex and creation. So different traditions, different pagan traditions have named these frequencies, these universal laws, by different names and given them different forms. But at the end of the day, it's the same kind of thing.
Okay, sorry to jump around a little bit, but a few minutes ago, I should have asked you a follow-up question about EC's contemporary Greek rule of the year. So it's centered around the cycle of the sun, and it appears to correspond to the Celtic wheel of the year. And
Yes.
from what you wrote, each month features a deity. You covered those. So this is the fourth month. It's Aphrodite. There's an ancient festival, the month zodiac sign, and the virtues of the venerated deity. So it's obviously easier to use than the traditional Athenian lunisolar calendar used by many Hellenic reconstructionists. Apart from that, does it have any other advantages? Is it just like a neat little system that everyone can use?
It is a neat system that everybody can use. That's what I love about it. But at the same time, it's adopted to work for the contemporary person in modern life, and also to coincide with the Celtic wheel of the year, which many people are already familiar with. So it's easier to adopt it. But also with what we are celebrating, because we're celebrating the winter solstice and the summer solstice and the equinoxes that the ancient Greeks didn't celebrate as that. But these days we are. So what EC has done is bring them in and assign them like gods and goddesses that are aligned, and festivals that are aligned with that energy. For example, in the winter solstice in December, we call it the Triesperon festival, which is very much aligned with the winter solstice and Christmas/Sun Mass, because what that celebrates is the birth of Hercules, the sun god Hercules, the birth of the sun, essentially, as the days start growing longer after the winter solstice. So Triesperon in Greek means 3 nights, because from the 20th until the 23rd of December, the 3 nights stay the same length as, and they don't grow like shorter or longer. And then from the 24th onwards, the days start growing longer again, and therefore we have the birth of the sun. So you see the correlation between there. But aside from that, what I feel that EC has done really well is bring in the virtues that draw from ethical philosophy that all the philosophical schools talked about, and that are assigned to different gods and goddesses. For example, each god and goddess has at least 2 virtues that, by practicing those virtues, we help ourselves embody the essence of that god, but also we get to live a better life, because the whole point of ancient Greek religion was to guide people into living virtuous lives. For example, in January, Hera's virtues are fearless speech and pride. And I go into detail in the book about how the ancient philosophers talked about that. So that is an ethical calendar as well as a religious one.
One issue that dawned on me while you were talking was that EC have basically tied in their particular Greek calendar with the Celtic Harvest Festival. So that works well in the Northern Hemisphere. I grew up in Australia, and one of the problems that we had was all the festivals were basically 6 months out.
Yes.
So does EC factor that in for people using their system in the Southern Hemisphere, or do they just wing it by using the Northern Hemisphere correspondences?
They haven't adopted that, but I have in the book. So in the book, I say, like, if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, like, think of it 6 months with a 6 month difference, and then adjust them in that way. And this way you can make it work.
Okay.
That being said, it's really important to note here that the Greek wheel of the year, all the wheels of the years that the ancient Greek city-states practiced, they were based on their geographical location and the seasons they experienced. Hence why the Celtic wheel is different from the Greek one. Hence why the Australian one is different, because you have more seasons, right?
Well, no,
or is it less?
No, it's still the same number of seasons. It's still 4 seasons, but they're 6 months out.
Yeah, but I don't know. But I because my first degree was in geography, and I seem to remember, learning that yes, it's the same number of seasons, like, officially, but in reality, you have either more or less seasons in Australia.
Well, where I grew up in Sydney, the climate is very similar to what it is in Southern California. So we don't really have 4 seasons here because there's no winter.
There you go. There you go.
On the East Coast during winter, people have snow. It's really cold. Whereas in California, during fall, it starts to get a bit cool, stays cool, and the next thing you know, you're in spring, and we kind of miss winter. And it was much the same thing in Australia, although it did rain a lot more.
Yes, that's exactly my point. So it's really important to align to the climate of the place you're in. And if it makes sense, adjust those festivals to work with where you are. Because let's remind ourselves that this is an earth-based religion that's meant to help align you with the cycles of the earth. So if you are at a part of the earth that has a completely different system when it comes to, like, seasons, adjust your life and the calendar to that rather than blindly follow it. I think that's a really mindful way to go about it.
Absolutely. And you're also expecting a degree of maturity and intelligence for people who are following your system. So rather than just blindly follow what you're saying, they have to implement it, make it relevant to themselves, Aleister Crowley would do the same thing in his writings. He'd put in little fool filters and things to catch people out. He expected people to think carefully about what he was writing.
Yes. And that's why I wanted to make clear throughout the book that this is an earth-based religion, because we can get so complicated with like names, because let's face it, like the ancient Greek religion has a lot of content and a lot of information, and this is a thick book with like really small letters. So, but I wanted to also make it clear that it can be simple. That's why, like in the chapters of the gods, I have a section for every god called How to Meet the God Out in Nature, to remind ourselves that this is an earth-based religion. Let's get out of the house, not just at the altar, and get out in nature and meet the gods out in nature, and realize you don't have to follow this calendar if you don't have the time, or if you don't want to. You can just get out there, see the sunrise in the morning and say, hey, Apollo, and have that be enough.
That's actually a really good point, because for so many people, they live in the city, they're not really aware of the seasons. They just know they've got to put on an extra jacket when it gets cold. Food comes in from all over the world, so they're not eating in harmony with the seasons. They're totally divorced from the environment that they're living in. So I'm glad that you're encouraging people to earth center themselves, to become more in tune with what's happening on the planet around them.
Exactly. I think that's the most important thing to do.
Yeah. You wrote in your book that full moon festivals in ancient Greece consisted of all-night festivities reserved almost exclusively for women, and were in honor of the moon goddesses Selene, Artemis, and Hecate. I have to admit that I didn't really come across any material on that when I was writing, and it just seemed that the ancient Greeks focused on the dark moon, the new moon, and then the following few days, and the rest of the month appeared largely empty except for annual festivals, which would sneak in. So I was wondering what information out there is about full moon workings in ancient Greece. I would love a reference. I'm always trying to learn something new every day, and this is something I missed.
Yes. So when I was writing that section about rituals, I really wanted to include new moon and the full moon ritual, just because they're so popular these days. And I was curious, like, what did the ancient Greeks think about it? And I know you have this in your book as well. I was fascinated to find out that the ancient Greeks really honored the moon on almost a daily basis, whereas each day of the lunar calendar was dedicated to a different god, like a lot of the days, with the new moon, the Numenia, being the most important and most sacred day of the years. And when it came to the full moon, I was searching, I'm like, surely I can find something. And there, as you said, there was nothing until I found a little reference. I found a little reference in a book talking about like the full moon rituals. And all we have is exactly what I just wrote. We don't have a lot of information. We only have the information that it had to, it was dedicated to women. It was a ritual celebrated by women, and they celebrated Artemis and Selene. I have the reference. Afterwards, remind me, and I'm going to send you a picture of it.
I will definitely remind you. I need to know.
Yeah. So what I did essentially, because we don't have a lot of information about it, is I included that little bit, and then I made up a ritual, a full moon ritual, based on what I know, what I practice myself, by bringing in the full moon goddesses, and also matching it a little bit with my own manifestation moon ritual, and therefore aligning the energy of the full moon, which is all about releasing and really honoring and completing something, aligning that with the goddesses of the moon, and guiding people to having a manifestation practice with a new moon and the full moon.
I've always emphasized the importance of channeling intuitive communication from the deities as part of developing a relationship with them, which means two-way communication. In your book, you pointed out the need to distinguish between real intuitive messages from the deities and the ego's interference. I was wondering if you could summarize your process for this.
Yes. So usually when we receive intuitive guidance, which is all day, every day, we just don't realize it if we don't consciously tune into it. There usually comes the ego to judge it. I've been teaching intuitive development for many years. I have a course called Intuition Mastery School. And that was the number one question I got asked. Like, how do I know if it's coming from spirit or if it's coming from my ego? And I included like a short process to finding that out, like rules of thumb. The first rule of thumb is if it's ego guidance, if it's divine guidance, you've already followed it. That means it feels so certain that you don't doubt it. You've already followed it because it feels true. Whereas if it's ego guidance, you doubt it. You ask people's opinions about it. You're like, is it that one? Or is it that one? Oh, what do you think I should do? So that's ego. Divine guidance feels true. There's a feeling, an expansiveness. That's the second point. There's a feeling of expansion, that is intuitive guidance, and there's a feeling of contraction, that is ego guidance. So these are the most important steps that I would say to distinguishing between ego guidance and divine guidance, whether it's coming from the gods or your intuition or not.
Okay. I'm really impressed with your desire to help your readers succeed in their quest for developing a relationship with the Greek deities. And to this end, you make yourself available in a support capacity on Facebook, Instagram, and you have resources available for download on your website. Are there any final tips that you'd like to share on how to enhance your workings with the Greek deities?
Yes, my favorite way, and I think it's a fun way to connect with the gods, aside from like having the altar in the house, is wherever you are working from. Let's say, for example, it's your office desk at work. If you can, create your own like secret mini altar. I have them in every single workspace that I have. It's an easy thing to do, and it doesn't have to be something big. Like literally right now where I am, like next to me, I have like a little statue. Well, it's not a little, but if I were at work, it would have been a little, like a statue of Aphrodite, a crystal, and a candle. And even like in the most like mainstream muggle, like corporate offices, they're not gonna judge you if you have like a little crystal because they're so popular right now. Yeah. So a touchstone essentially to connect you with that divinity. Because we're visual people, as human beings, we like compartmentalizing energies. Otherwise, we wouldn't have created names for these gods and goddesses who are essentially lost. But we want to relate to them in a more palpable, physical way. So we relate more with the gods when we see something. Okay, so by having a statue or a picture or a figurine or a crystal, something that symbolizes that, easiest thing to do. I have these, for those of you watching the video,
Athena.
Yes, Athena's like owl. Like if someone asks, like in a corporate environment, okay, I love owls.
Yeah.
Favorite animal. But to me, I know that's my connection with Athena.
With Athena,
and whenever I write my books, I have that next to me. I may go out to cafes and I may have like my little owl statue next to me and I'm writing because I know that's Athena. I wouldn't have a whole statue of Athena next to me like at Starbucks. But an owl, yes, people would judge, but like, who cares? I'm a professional weirdo. But my point is...
I knew there was something I liked about you.
And my point is, you can make it work in an easy way. Oh, like this one that I'm holding right now. This is a ceramic rose that I made. I mean, it's beautiful. It's my connection to Aphrodite. So you can have a ceramic rose next to you because you like flowers, you can tell people, but it's your connection to Aphrodite. So by bringing the gods into your day-to-day life in this physical, palpable way, that's a way to keep that connection strong and going.
Another possibility is a statue of a dove. So Christians will look at it and think that you've got the Holy Spirit there, but you're actually using the dove to interface with Aphrodite.
There you go.
Yeah.
There are and by the way, in the book, I have like a section, a symbolism section for every god. I'm sure you can find something that's mainstream enough that you can bring into every space.
I think so. Um, as people work with the Greek gods, they start to be drawn more to one god than all the others.
Yes.
I get the feeling that with you it's Aphrodite. You've brought her up a number of times. Would you consider yourself to be a priest of Aphrodite, or are there other gods or goddesses that you feel closer to?
That is a question I get asked a lot, especially when I go to like witchcraft podcasts, because I realize it is a practice to dedicate yourself to a god and say, I'm a god to Hades, sorry, I'm a priest to Hades, or I'm a priest to this god. That's not what I was trained to do in as part of like the contemporary practice. The whole idea is that we honor all the gods because we have to honor all aspects of ourselves as well. We have to honor all aspects of nature. So if, let's say, for example, Aries is a god about standing up for people, courage and bravery, it's a lot of masculine energy. If you solely focus on that, then it's a lot of masculine energy. You need to balance it out with something else. That's why Aphrodite, since I'm bringing her up again, Aphrodite used to be the only one she was a consort to Ares, and that symbolically means that only love can stop war. So you need the one to balance the other. So in the same way, we have a male god and a female goddess on the altar at all times to create that balance. We need to find that balance within us as well. So I don't consider myself to be a priest to any particular god. I have my guardian god, that is Apollo, not Aphrodite. The reason I bring her up all the time is because, as you know, in Cyprus, mythologically, Aphrodite was born here. So I just know more about her because of the history of the island and because of the research that I've done of her. She's one of my favorite goddesses. But I would say that my ultimate favorite god is Apollo. But if people feel called to be a priest to a particular god or goddess, by all means, go for it. In the ancient times, that's what they did. It's just that we're not at that scale right now that we're able to do this. We don't have multiple temples anymore and people dedicating themselves to a particular god and working under that particular god or goddess. And that's why we're honoring it all. We're bringing it into a more contemporary space. But it doesn't mean it's the right way to go. So, yeah.
One thing I found really interesting was you were saying that the only way to stop war is with love. And I found myself thinking about the Iliad, where it was the other way around. You basically had the love of Paris for Helen leading to war, where the Greeks came to invade the Trojans.
Here's an interesting fact about that. Not about Troy, but about the war culture that the ancient Greeks were so famous about. In Sparta, Sparta, that was considered like the epitome of war. They had chained Ares statues. So there's not much about it, and I was fascinated when I read about it, where they had a statue of Ares that was chained to the earth as a way of bringing peace. So they wanted to cultivate peace despite their war culture. So I think that's an interesting thing.
I actually remember reading about that. I think it was chained with the chains of Hermes from memory. It's been a long time since I read it.
I'm not sure, but yeah, every year they would carry the same ritual, I think, to rechain the statue. It was like a thing.
The one I'm thinking about was it was an apotropaic statue where they were trying to prevent the invasion of sea pirates or something like that. So you had this chained statue of Ares.
Yes, I remember reading about that as well. Yes. And that happened in many different aspects, many different parts of Greece as well.
Something I just thought about asking was I've started getting more and more involved with Hekate at the moment, and Hekate is incredibly popular in a lot of witchcraft circles and the like. Do you have any thoughts on working with Hekate, or perhaps having Hekate as a principal goddess of sorts?
What I find very interesting about Hekate is that she's Orphic hymn number 1. First of all, let's start there.
Yeah.
Also, let's also mention she's a very ancient goddess, and she was honored before she was associated to witchcraft. So I know she's associated with witchcraft now, and she became associated with witchcraft in the Hellenistic years, like in later antiquity. But she's a much older goddess than that. And in the past, before that, she was not associated with witchcraft. She had a different kind of meaning. So I haven't studied her much, so I'm not going to share a lot about it. But whenever I've worked with her, I've tried to see beyond just the witchcraft component and try to find the mysteries behind that, because there is so much wisdom that I feel is covered up by her association with witchcraft in the later years, because she's in many, like so many mentioned in so many spells. For example, in the what's it called? The Egyptian spell book, the papyri.
The Greek magic papyri.
Yes, the papyri. Like she's mentioned in a lot of the spells there, but there is so much more behind that. She's the crone aspect of the moon, and that holds a lot of wisdom. And I actually recently bought a statue of her, the three faces of Hekate, and I have that in my bedroom as a way of like deepening my connection with her.
Yeah, I actually almost bought one a couple of weeks ago when we were in New York City, but the version they had 3 faces, which I was hoping for, but also 3 bodies. I think I just want the 1 body and 3 faces, one facing each direction of the crossroads.
I think I have the 3 bodies as well. I think that's the one I have. Yeah.
Okay. So we're both looking at the same one.
Yeah.
Okay. It's been a wonderful chat with you. So I was wondering, what current projects are you engaging in now?
So actually, I have another book coming out in November, which I'm so excited about. It's called Ancient Manifestation Secrets. And it's about the 7 laws of the universe according to the Hermetics, according to the Kybalion, and working with the energy field to manifesting your desires. So I'm combining like the ancient texts with like modern like energy field manifestation practices. And the other thing I'm so excited about is I'm teaching for the first time the energy clearing practitioner course in Rhinebeck, New York in September at the Omega Institute, which I'm so excited. This draws from my previous book, Protect Your Light.
Nice. So if listeners want to either contact you or learn more about you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I practically live on Instagram at George Lizos, or you can find me on my website, georgelizos.com, and you can learn more about the book at greekmysticism.com. And when you get the book, you also get a free workshop with me all about meeting your guardian god or goddess.
That is so cool that you stand by your readers. You want them to get as much out of the book as possible.
I love connecting with people. Even though I'm an introvert, like I love connecting with people online because it's more manageable.
Susan, do you have any questions for George or comments? You've been sitting there very, very quietly.
Oh, this has been fascinating. I think I speak for all of the viewers out there that just watching Tony and George interact, and it's just fascinating. I've actually learned a lot about, very, very important thing that you said, which is that you should work with all of them. So that was a big takeaway for me, and I'm going to definitely meditate. And I would just love to have you come back on the show and just speak further if you would like. But thank you so, so very much, George. It's been a pleasure meeting you. And Tony, it's just been an exciting interview. Well done.
And hopefully our paths will cross in September in New York City.
Oh, that would be so good to like get to chat in person.
That'd be fantastic. So, George, thank you so much for coming on the show and letting us get to know you a little bit better. Susan and I both wish you success with all your future endeavors. Have a good night.
Have a great night.
Thank you so much. And by the way, thank you so much for writing your fabulous book, because it was one of the first books that I read on Greek polytheism, and definitely helped me get started on my path. So I appreciate like getting to chat to you.
Well, thank you so much for your kind words. I really appreciate them. And I also appreciate the work that you're doing. You're working with people who normally wouldn't look at my book. You're working with light workers, people who are working with light workers and ascended masters. You're tapping into a demographic that I don't have access to. And the end result is we're bringing back the worship of the Greek gods. And that is just so, so important.
Exactly. Yes.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so very much for both of you for coming on. I greatly appreciate it, and have a wonderful evening.
Okay,
Thank
good
you so
night.
much for both of you. Bye. Good night.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.